Blog Talk Radio.
Paranormal Review Radio.
Hello and welcome, everyone. It's Friday night, and you know what that means. You're listening to Paranormal Review Radio, the only radio show without commercials and with more great paranormal talk. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Anthony Agati in New York.
And I'm Lucy Liebfried in Chicago. You are listening to one of the highest-rated paranormal radio shows on Blog Talk. No bull, no lies, just a true platform for everyone to share their knowledge and experiences. When searching for truth, good communication is key. Now, our phone lines are open for questions or stories. The call-in number is 661-244-9831. Our chat room is also open, so you can type in your questions or comments as well. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Paranormal Review Radio. You'll find more articles, blogs, full show uploads, and if you have specific questions or comments or would like to be a guest on the show, email us at paranormal.review@aol.com. Now, sit back, get comfy, and prepare to open your minds. It's time for Paranormal Review Radio.
In the last half of the 19th century, the spiritualist movement soared high across the world, including here in the United States. Now, some say the reason for this boost was for two reasons. One, quite possibly many more people began to become more financially stable, and they didn't have to worry about starving to death anymore. So now they were concentrating on their soul. And two, because of many scientific advancements in the 19th century that defied many of the Christian teachings, people sought to affirm or quite possibly reaffirm their beliefs in eternity and death. So it would only seem fit that as the world was energetically calling upon the universe for answers, that it delivered them in the form of angelic messages bound and published into a book of over 2,000 pages that told the tale of how the world began and who we really are. This book is called the Urantia Book and has many fascinating aspects similar and different than the Bible, which obviously has come under fire by many religious figures. But the one difference is that the many revelations written about in this book, published in 1955, are now being validated and verified in leaps and bounds. One man helping to gather all this information and produce the amazing work to verify these revelations is here with us tonight. Halbert Katzen, retired attorney, public speaker, educator, and creator and writer for ubthenews.com. Mr. Katzen has written many works on the Urantia Book, especially in comparing scientific discoveries bound in the pages of this mysterious book. If you studied and read the Urantia Book, or if you have never heard of this book before, tonight will be an amazing night of new discoveries and moments of deep thought. We are excited to talk with Mr. Katzen, so please help me in welcoming Halbert Katzen to the show. Welcome, Halbert. Thanks for coming on the show again.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Hello, Halbert. Thank you again for coming on the show. Now, we have a lot of questions to ask you, so I think we should start off by talking about the Urantia Book. Can you explain briefly what the Urantia Book is in a way so that our audience can grasp the concept easily?
Sure, I'd be happy to. First of all, to get people a little bit familiar with the word itself, Urantia, there's a lot of coined words in the Urantia Book, and Urantia is one of them, and they're rich with etymological meaning. Urantia means our place in the heavens, people may be familiar with that URAN beginning. We have the planet Uranus. The word Uranology means study of the heavens. So the Urantia book is like saying the Earth book. That's what Urantia refers to. The book, you could say conceptually, is divided into 3 parts, technically 4 parts, but in terms of a brief overview, let's say 3. The first third, it talks a lot about theology and cosmology, what happens after we die, different orders of angels, how the whole ecology of spiritual beings interrelate with each other. The middle third of the book is a history of our planet, Urantia, starting with the birth of the solar system and the geophysical development of the planet, and then single-celled life evolving into plant and animal life, and then a million-year history of human life. And then the last third is the life and teachings of Jesus, and it gives all the years of his life and an extensive background on the times and the people involved with him. And that's basically how the book lays out. And as you kind of pointed out in your opening remarks there, it's claiming a superhuman origin. It actually says different orders of beings wrote different parts of the Urantia book depending on what the subject matter was and their particular, relationship to the celestial administration of things. So, for instance, you had angels involved with sort of ministering to the apostles and things like that, involved with the section on Jesus, and then you have beings involved with bringing life to the planet, writing the sections on the history of the planet. Just sort of obvious things that way.
Well, Albert, how did you come to find this book, and why did you decide to study it? Did it affect your life?
Well, I was taking a year off between high school and college. I had gone to prep school in New England. It was a sort of a rough and interesting road. We don't need too many of those details, I'm sure, right now, but enough to say I really needed a year off after high school before I was going to start college. And I had this burning desire to go out to California. And when I was in prep school, one day someone came from Greenpeace and spoke at assembly to the student body about Greenpeace. And I got it in my head I'd like to go try and work for them a little bit on my year off, and found a canvas operating in Santa Cruz, and joined up with the Greenpeace canvas in Santa Cruz back in late 1980. And as it turned out, there were about 10 of us or so in the canvas, and perhaps half of the canvas was very familiar with the Urantia book, or reasonably familiar to very familiar. And eventually one of them introduced it to me, and the short of it is I took a liking to it right away, or pretty close to right away. I was agnostic up until that point. The thing that really set me off thinking was a statement about faith, really a question that I found so intriguing. There's one point where it says, is faith, the supreme assertion of human thought, desirable? And that question just really set my mind a reeling, because I had never heard of faith defined as a supreme assertion of human thought. And so I set about to wondering, what that could mean. And it sort of opened me up to the idea that faith was a choice. I suppose up until that point I thought faith was something that happened to people. Either they accepted it because their parents taught them and they were young and believed whatever their parents said, and maybe something very good or something bad or something dramatic happened. I never really looked at it as we're just free to choose. And so that supreme assertion of human thought phrasing is, among other things, opened me up to an appreciation of faith as a choice. And then I thought of it as a choice that, is one of these consecrated choices that you may initially make in a moment when one first makes a choice to have faith in God, but it's intended for a lifetime, so it needs reaffirmed continually. And I think in that sense, it's one of those supreme assertions of human thought, because it really creates a new relationship to life. So a lot of that was just more in things I was reading in the Urantia book were certainly consistent with this thinking and everything, but it was really that one phrase that set me off to just really think about faith. And it helped me appreciate the difference between having faith and having beliefs. So at any rate, that's what happened to me. And so after about 4 days of reading the Urantia book and thinking thoughts, I chose to have faith, and I also chose to believe that the Urantia book is what it claims to be. That belief has been increasingly easy to maintain, I should say, for the reasons that you have me on your program. New discoveries and scientific advances are increasingly supporting the history in the Urantia book, and the history is what the authors say will stand the records of the ages to come, as they put it. They really put their credibility on the line with the history, and there's a lot of history in the Urantia book that's inconsistent with scholarship, with science, and has been for 50 years. And the pattern, nonetheless, is that new discoveries and scientific advances increasingly support it, and that's the peculiar and interesting trend that I'm known for documenting.
Well, these papers, they touch on so much, from the universal Father to God's relationship with everything, to Jesus, the universe, the history of man on earth. It even talks about marriage, religion, magic, social issues. I mean, to read this completely, it would take a great deal of time. So how does one begin to study this book?
Well, the first thing that I would say at this point, and I must say it's taken me a long time to sort of come around to emphasizing this issue. But one of the tricky, challenging things about the Urantia book, I'll say two things. It comes to us as a revelation, and it's ahead of its time. So there's a difference between something being a revelation and being an affirmation, and there's a difference between something being ahead of its time and being timely. So one of the things about the Urantia book is that it claims to be an epical revelation. It claims to be teachings that will be here guiding us for 1,000 years plus. All right, so many generations. And with that, it has challenging teachings. I mean, just we've touched already on the fact that it asserts things about the history of our planet that are inconsistent, incongruent with scholarship and with science. So right there's a challenge. It has teachings about family that some people will find challenging. It has teachings about the races, the history of humanity, about eugenics that some people find challenging. It has theological teachings and uses, for instance, the Trinity concept and the use of the word Father for God in ways that some people will find challenging. And it will say many other things that people just find wonderfully affirming, and will say things so beautifully and explain things so well that they always felt and thought and knew was correct. And so it is a very challenging text in this regard. And I think that people need to be warned about that from the beginning if they want to have a smoother relationship to the Urantia book. That's one of the things I would have to say. I probably have opened up different cans of worms here. I don't know what direction you want to go play with. It's all fine with me. We got plenty of time.
I think you may have already answered this question by just what you just said, but I'm going to ask it anyway because you may have a different take on it. Why should we take the Urantia book seriously?
Oh, okay. So, great question, and that goes back to the point I said about being ahead of its time.
Right.
Let's, just for the sake of the argument, just for perspective, I consider, the generous interpretation that the Urantia book is ahead of its time as compared to just plain wrong,
Yeah.
Right? Let's say it's ahead of its time, You just want to give me a break here tonight for a moment. Okay. So if we've got something that's ahead of its time, and it doesn't matter whether it's the Urantia book or something political or a new product or, a new band, something cultural. But when things are ahead of their time, most people won't appreciate them. If most people, or even a good percentage of people, would appreciate them now, we wouldn't call it ahead of its time.
Right.
So that means that if a person is really into something that's ahead of its time, first of all, they're going to be very annoying to other people if they try to promote it a lot. And if something is ahead of its time, it probably doesn't need really pushed on people because it's not timely. And what does it mean to have an evolving process to where something becomes timely, and why would it be that way, and what's the point? Well, here we have a situation where the Urantia book authors put their credibility at stake, asserting that the history will stand the records of the ages to come. So that's something that over time, if it's true, it will make the book increasingly credible, increasingly authoritative in its, presentation of material. It will be respected for how it has stood the test of time and provided information in advance of, a common human appreciation of whatever factoid, we're talking about. So if you take the Urantia book teachings, at face value and get into the book, it talks about the importance of humanity having its evolutionary experiential experience, and that while there are periodic downreaches, and especially when there's certain emergencies or things go wrong, and we can talk about that, the whole Lucifer rebellion and fallen angels and all of that stuff, there's downreaches, but these downreaches are designed to help humanity evolve and mature, not to be overly controlling, because free will is essential for love to be real. And so part of the wisdom of God is to not be, so over-controlling that we don't have free will and a sense of freedom in life. That's that's the rub.
Right.
Of course, you don't need to go to the Urantia book to get that concept. It's, well appreciated perspective, and certainly the Urantia book is harmonious with that. So we've got something that's designed to be attractive to people at varying degrees at various stages of development post-publication. And so going back to your question, like, why should someone believe it or something? Some people should believe it and some people shouldn't. Some people are disposed to check things out before they're well established in their credibility. And some people are disposed to be more cautious. And society as a whole, civilization as a whole, is valued by this diversity, and we need to respect it and appreciate it. So I think that this is one of the things that's important to appreciate about the Urantia book, because the religious zeal and the deep appreciation that can come with being exposed to it and, finding it so uplifting can lead to a very zealous, enthusiastic effort to share it with other people. And if we're talking about something that's ahead of its time and people are zealously, enthusiastically sharing it with other people, you can see how that might quickly get uncomfortable for everybody. And so many Urantia book readers, believers, have had that, type of unfortunate experience. And those that they love and have been friends with have shared it with them, being the recipients of all that, right? And so increasingly over the years, I've come to appreciate, to honor, to respect the breadth of perspective and relationship that people will have to it, and to realize that it's not right for everyone now. And in fact, there's things in the Urantia book that suggest that when the time is right, that time will come rather quickly, and we won't, have to worry about getting it out there or something,
Well, do you believe, in all the work that you've done thus far up until this moment, do you believe that the Urantia book and all that it encompasses, and all of the history and all of the words that it communicates to people, do you think that the Urantia book is or has been much more verified and validated with evidence than any other faith or belief that's out there in the world?
Well, it would be one thing to try and compare it to other things if there was anything else out there that truly compared. It's a little bit like the Grateful Dead in that sense. They were fond of saying, we're not the best band at what we do, we're the only ones who do it. And the Urantia book is distinct in terms of what it provides for information. So, in other words, sure, the Bible provides historic information. Other religious texts provide historic information. But in all fairness, you don't compare them apples to apples with something like the Urantia book, which is so detailed and literal and specific and comprehensive and just exhaustive compared to all these other things. It's like they're just not even on the same playing field. So, I think that really has to be acknowledged from the get-go, is there is not another religious text in the world that in any way compares in terms of the scope, breadth, depth, detail, literal, relationship to the integration of things spiritual, mental, and physical. I mean, it's just an extraordinary work on so many levels that, then we get to this issue of new discoveries catching up to it. And like I say, it's, I don't know what you would compare it to. Do you have something in mind? I don't know how you'd even get a fair comparison. I studied comparative religion. I couldn't find it,
I don't think I wanted you to compare it to any other religion. I think the idea is because I've read so much in the little amount of time that I have, read so much on UB the News and your work and others that I have read and some documentaries that I've watched, that it seems as though I've been exposed to a lot more or much more validity in the words that are in this book, backed up with evidence, than I have in all the years that I have been a Christian and learning the Bible. And to me, the Bible itself, I haven't seen much evidence put forward that I can say, wow, okay, I believe that, as I am when I'm reading about the Urantia Book and your work and others that have put forward evidence to say, this is true and this is what was said in there and this is now scientific evidence or historic evidence, whatever it may be. It just seems to be that there's a lot more validity and evidentiary things that are being put forward that seem to validate the words that are in the book.
Well, one of the reasons for that, I think that should be pointed out, I mean, in just terms of a broad brush stroke, is that, like, the New Testament, there's a tradition of people trying to establish its credibility based upon revelation, right? So this is where it's predicting something about the future, and then it has to be interpreted, and it's artistically presented in symbolic terms to begin with, and so you have that whole type of struggle and issue. The Bible really wasn't set up as a document that was, specifically at odds with scholarship. It was the historical document.
Right.
This is when you didn't even have the printing presses and stuff. I mean, this is a whole different theme going on. And then the Urantia book comes along, and it's not predicting stuff about the future. It's giving all this information about the past, going back 1 million years just for human beings, and 4 billion for the planet, and it's just on a whole different scale that way. And it's about corroborating what happened in the past rather than predicting what will happen in the future. So that's a very different thing as well. And the time spans being covered are quite different. I mean, obviously with the Bible, you've got things compressed into 6,000 years or so, right? And so you've got those types of issues. If you even try to do a historical comparison of how, and people do that a bit, how do new discoveries compare to the history of the Bible. It's not as though that field is, totally absent from scholarly investigation, but it's not what you'd call a main thing. It's not like winning Christians left and right. It's not the point. It never has been. Winning people into the kingdom is about spreading the gospel message of we're all children of God. Let's have faith. Let's believe that, our Heavenly Father is for real, and we're all His children, and we'll survive after we die, and let's treat each other accordingly. That's what that was about. But the Urantia book comes with all of that and more. And it's putting its credibility on the line in a specific way. It isn't just about having spiritual faith. it's not just making an appeal to spirit. And on a certain level, one might say, I mean, notwithstanding its value in bringing in people into faith, I'm a perfect example. I gave you my story, right? It inspired me to have faith, right? But it's obviously so much more than that, right? It's not the simple gospel message. It's incredibly intellectually challenging. It's written at a PhD level in many places, really throughout generally, but some places are just ridiculously complex compared to, most theological writings or religious writings. It really has some unique qualities in terms of providing education about government and culture and going beyond that simple spiritual message that Jesus brought. And it explains why. Why it's timely to have an expanded teaching now. And that's one of the things that's just so darn interesting about the book, because it is providing a lot more. And it's really painfully logical. It's refreshingly logical and painfully logical. When it's affirming something that we like, it's refreshingly logical. And when it's providing revelatory information that bumps up against our preconceived notions or politically correct identifications that, whatever,
right.
It's painfully logical. And people start to try to twist it into things that it doesn't say and make up stuff that the teachings got corrupted, and you get into all kinds of stuff that way because people aren't comfortable with some of the revelatory part. And so it's quite a dance, It's
Your area of expertise is in the analysis and evidence to validate the Urantia book, and I haven't read the entire book, and I'm not familiar with a lot of the evidence in support of the book, other than the little that I've read, and like I said before, some of the stuff that I have read on ubthenews.com and some of your work. But what really fascinated me was the Adam and Eve report, and the little that I have researched on that. The Adam and Eve report truly, really did fascinate me. One particular reason why it did was because ever since I was young and growing up Catholic, I could never grasp the concept that Adam and Eve were the first two man and woman ever to set foot on this earth and were created in the very beginning. It just was in the back of my mind that for some reason I could not get it. And it wasn't just because I couldn't grasp the idea of the first man and then the first woman. It was just the idea that I always kept saying that there had to have been something before. There had to be someone before. Can you talk a little bit about the Adam and Eve report? I know it's a little bit complex and it goes in so many different branches, but can you talk a little bit about the Adam and Eve report and what you found in doing this investigation or in this evidence analysis, and go through some of the specifics just to give people an idea of what that's all about, and maybe give them a sort of the concept of what maybe the Urantia book is actually teaching everyone?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to, and it certainly is one of the most interesting, intriguing reports on the UB the News website. And your comments about your sensibilities growing up, I imagine it was somewhat triggered by the biblical account, which talks of Cain going to the land of Nod. And so even in the Old Testament account, it raises questions about whether Adam and Eve were really the first people. At least it does for some people. Other people have ways of reading that, that they interpret it, is not a problem, that Cain went this other tribe after killing Abel. but in the Urantia book, that's actually explained in detail, and it's particularly interesting in terms of how new discoveries are supporting the Urantia book, because when the Urantia book was published in 1955, we did not yet know that there were 46, not 48 chromosomes. We were just figuring that out with our microscopes. The whole field of genetics was just in its infancy, or still in embryonic stages, you might say. And the Urantia book gives extensive information about human genetics. And essentially it says that human genetics evolve, and that there's an intelligent design and pattern to this, and that human genetics reach a pinnacle of evolutionary attainment that has involved both gradual as well as periodic mutative changes. And when it reaches its apex of biologic evolution, an order of beings are brought to the planet to upstep it even further biologically. And this order of beings are known as the Adam and Eves. So in the Urantia book Cosmology, it says the universe is inhabited with many planets of mortals like ours, each one a little different and unique in its ways, but generally with similarities. And that this is, part of a broad plan for creating mortal life. And what's distinct about these advanced genetics that come from Adam and Eve is that rather than being progressive in their nature from generation to generation, they're retrogressive. And the reason is so that their genetics don't take over the planet. They're here to upstep, not to take over. So the general plan is for Adam and Eve to have children, and then their children have children, and they, raise a nation of about 500,000, and then their descendants are to go out and mix with humanity and upstep it biologically so it will be more fit and resistant to disease and more intelligent and, just all around healthier and better. And so this is, part of the plan for how God creates beings in all kinds of different ways and creates a spiritual ecology of interactive, synergistic, cooperative fun and games, if you will. I mean, the game of life. And so the Urantia book recounts that 37,000 years ago is when humanity reached that biologic apex, and our Adam and Eve came to the planet. And the Urantia book also recounts that the mythologies about Lucifer and Satan and the devil have elements of truth to them, and that our world did suffer a spiritual administrative rebellion, and that Adam and Eve came to the planet after this rebellion occurred, and consequently had a harder time of it. And that harder time that they had of it inspired them to do what they ought not to have done, which was to try to accelerate the plan for biologically upstepping the human race. And so this involved Adam and Eve directly mating with some of the humans. And this is in the Urantia Book considered the default of Adam and Eve. It wasn't a rebellion. They weren't going against God, but they broke the rules. And so our Judeo-Christian traditions about Adam and Eve getting in trouble with God and it having to do with the issue of good and evil and the tree of knowledge and this type of thing. According to the Urantia Book, these are, the issues that came up. I'm giving you a broad brush stroke of it, but it's all by way of saying that this set in motion an accelerated introduction of Adam and Eve's genetics into the human gene pool about 37,000 years ago. Now, the Adam and Eve report that you mentioned is related to the research of a geneticist named Bruce Long from the University of Chicago. And he was doing research on the microcephalin gene, and the microcephalin gene is responsible for brain growth. And because the Urantia Book says that Adam and Eve's genetics enhanced brain function, this sets up the beginnings of a correlation. So his research showed that about 37,000 years ago, an additional piece of genetic material showed up on the microcephalin gene and spread very rapidly throughout the human population in a distinct pattern that can be traced by, advances in genetics. So he says this probably happened, Bruce Long says this introduction onto the microcephalin gene probably happened about 37,000 years ago. The Urantia Book says that Adam and Eve came 35,914 BC, so also about 37,000 years ago. And the Urantia Book recounts how the descendants of Adam and Eve spread throughout the world and brought civilization to the world in a conquering, kind of aggressive manner back then, but nonetheless were a driving, civilizing force on the planet. And so this is a correlation also because, the Urantia Book is saying when they did this, they were, mating with the women as they went along. And this is why their genetics spread. So Bruce Long's research indicates that this introduction of new material into the microcephalin gene came from a single source as compared to being broadly in the population from the beginning somehow. It seems to coalesce back to a single source. And with the Urantia Book, you've got this single pair of individuals. Bruce Long's research indicated that this originated in Mesopotamia, and the Urantia Book is very specific about where in Mesopotamia, off the coast of Syria, Adam and Eve lived, and then how they, after they had some trouble in the Garden of Eden, migrated to an area between the Tigris and the Euphrates. Was actually the second Garden of Eden, according to the Urantia Book. But in the Bible, we would have that as the first Garden of Eden. One of the other correlations is that this addition to the microcephalin gene did not make it in large percentages into sub-Saharan Africa. And that is consistent with what the Urantia Book says about Adam and Eve's descendants not venturing much into sub-Saharan Africa. An additional correlation is that Bruce Long's research studied the haplogroups and the areas around the microcephalin gene, and found that they were coalescing back to 990,000 years ago. And the Urantia Book says the first human beings evolved, mutated 991,474 BC. So We have a very close correlation there as well. Additional research showed how the spread of non-tonal languages also tracks with the migration of the microcephalin gene. Non-tonal languages are distinct from tonal languages in that you don't have to have an inflection of the word in order for the word to take on its meaning. Chinese is a tonal language. English, European languages are non-tonal. So there's additional correlations that way. That, in essence, is the Adam and Eve report.
And for the record, Bruce's work was done after 1955, correct?
It was done around 2005.
Gotcha. Okay.
2004. Yeah, about 50 years later.
And how is his work? I guess how is it held up within his peers or within the community?
Well, sadly, what happened was because his research showed that this additional material on the microcephalin gene did not make its way in large percentages into sub-Saharan Africa the way it did with the rest of the world's population. White supremacists latched on to this as support for their ideologies. And those who are reactionary to that type of reaction quickly came in and denounced, basically the whole implications of the research and just, made it impossible to talk about it intelligently because it's just not politically correct to do so. And it shut down his research. He was ready, the University of Chicago was going to apply for patents related to, the work that he did in these studies. And he was just, really kind of heartbroken over it. And there's quotes you can find in articles about it where he says, he came here from China. And he comments about how he came to the United States from China hoping to have academic freedom and cultural freedom, and was so discouraged to find out that his research was getting shut down because people couldn't handle a discussion about certain implications of it. And so it's really quite a sad chapter, and it was very sad for me personally as well because when I first started the UB the News project, I was traveling around the country in a motorhome and doing presentations all over at universities and churches and, wherever I could about this work. And I went to visit him and got a chance to meet with him for about 45 minutes one day, and we got on just wonderfully. I mean, we had a great talk. It was one of the highlights of my, journey back at that time was to actually meet up with this guy and, discuss all these ideas we shared and perspectives that we shared. And then a few years later, I tried to get back in touch with him, and he wouldn't return any of my efforts to get in touch. And I couldn't figure out why. It seemed so odd. And then I did some research and found out how his research had all got shut down and why he didn't want to talk about it anymore. And I didn't take it so personally anymore, but it was really unfortunate. It's a very sad chapter.
Well, you know what, Halbert, along those lines, I've always wondered, do you think that mainstream religion has suppressed the history of the earth? I mean, the evidence, it's not in a book, but on stone, carved all over the planet.
Well, I think there is a lot of suppression of information in all kinds of different ways. And sometimes, there's a lot of sort of mystery and, I'd say conspiracy wrapped around it. And I think sometimes there's reasonable support for that. And sometimes it's just that people stake their reputations on something and they won't get off of it, and ever, because they built a reputation on it. And that's one of the great challenges with science, is that it's always proving us wrong, whatever we thought before. So we've got this terribly challenging social dynamic where, people build their reputations by showing that those who came before them didn't have it right, and then they become attached in the very same way as the people before them. And this is just what happens on larger and smaller scales, I think Clovis first is one of the great examples, the whole Clovis first theory. The Big Bang theory, the out of Africa theory, all these theories are just getting beat up, There's new evidence coming in all the time. It just, really gives them a wallop, and it's been going on and on. But it's hard to come up with a new theory that everyone gets on board with. And, without that congealing thing, people are uncomfortable. They're uncomfortable to change. It's what we were talking about at the beginning, the issue of things being ahead of its time, and who's going to, check things out first, and who's going to be more status quo and cautious. And the fact is, we don't need or want an even distribution across the board that way. Society would become very unstable if there was a high percentage of people willing to, check out and dive in wholeheartedly into new untested things. It's really better that just a few people, take those risks, because it doesn't always work out so well. Right? So that's okay, but it has implications. It has implications across the board.
Well, Halbert, let me ask you about Dr. Sadler, who published this book. He was a great skeptic in things like the Urantia Book, but yet he's the one that gave it life. What have you been able to find out about why he did this?
Well, the general understanding of Dr. Sadler and his work, being involved with medicine and psychiatry and Chautauqua speaking engagements, and just really, being out there as a professional that way, one of the things he was also known for was being a debunker of supernatural phenomena, or claims about supernatural phenomena. So the story goes that a woman came to him about her husband becoming animated out of his sleep, and would he come check it out? And basically, there's some story about how the Urantia revelation eventually got produced through Dr. Sadler working with this person who chose to remain anonymous. Now, the anonymity of the person who's the main, if you will, channel or conduit for the Urantia revelation is really a key point. The Urantia book itself says very little about this. There's just a few passing references about how fortuitous it was that the indwelling spirit of God that we all have could work with this individual so effectively, because they were so unconcerned and disinterested in the whole phenomena and process that was happening to them. The point of all this is that secrecy was built in to the process of the origins of the Urantia Book. And the reason that the secrecy was built into the origins was because the intention is for the book to be a gift to humanity, and for it to be as unencumbered, if you will, as possible that way, and for its credibility to be based upon what it says, not stories and beliefs about stories and who knows who and that kind of thing. You know, if you want your epical revelation to stand on its own on the four corners of the text, then it's logical and stands to reason that you want to downplay emphasis on the how it got here, the human associations with that. So that's the game Sadler played, and that's how it unfolded. There's some information about this. Some people really delve into it and try and make a big deal out of it, and that's understandable because origin stories are how we test the credibility of things. You know, where did it come from? I mean, it's perfectly natural. And the mysterious origin detracts from credibility. It raises intrigue, but it isn't good for credibility. You know? So, in that sense, we've got an interesting dynamic with it all, you know, right from the beginning, especially then when you put it up against what we said about new discoveries and scientific advances increasingly supporting the history. You know, you've got a situation where not only is it out of step with scholarship from the beginning in just loads of ways, and there hasn't been any time for cooperative discoveries to occur, but the story itself of the origins is shrouded in secrecy and mystery, and just, you know, in that sense, detracts from the credibility and, you know, discourages, we might say, interest or participation. Maybe, you know, it's intriguing a bit, but it doesn't satisfy people. You know, it really doesn't.
Right.
So
you know, Albert, I'm an avid ancient astronaut and alien nut, you know, alien history nut. I've always been into UFOs and aliens, and I've heard the stories about Gobekli Tepe, and you've documented studies that show the Urantia Book actually revealed Gobekli Tepe 40 years before it was even discovered in Turkey. Can you, for our listeners, can you sort of talk a little bit about this find and how important this discovery is to Urantia and possibly to even mankind?
Well, what the Urantia Book says and what the discovery raises as an issue, you know, are kind of two distinct things that then intersect. What's going on with Gobekli Tepe as an archaeological site that is just so darn intriguing and mysterious is that there are monoliths similar, like in size to Stonehenge and you know, other large structures of rock and stone that are carved and engraved, and they're twice as old as Stonehenge or the pyramids. They go back about 12,000 years ago. And they span over a period of several thousand years. The site was intentionally buried, and the deeper they dig down, the more ornate and larger the stones become. So not only do we have evidence of civilization, of sophistication during a time period where we thought human beings were still like pre-agrarian, hunter-gatherer.
Right.
So it was just totally out of step with the whole history of humanity theories that are dominant still. It's one of these things, people in archaeology conveniently forget about Gobekli Tepe all the time when they're talking about the development of
conveniently do that.
Yeah. It's amazing how that one. And then in another article, the same author, whatever, will be talking about it. It's just weird, how at any rate, that's the issue. Why is it getting more advanced the deeper we go? And why is it, even more advanced than anything should be back in that time period? Is its own mystery. But then, so we've got a double mystery, right? That's the point. Double mystery. Advanced stuff and getting more advanced the older you get. What's up with that? And it's happening over thousands of years. What's up with that? We have theories about advanced civilizations, ancient civilizations being wiped out by something, the plague, some disease came and got them, or some war, or something happened and wiped them all out. But slow deterioration over thousands of years, no one's really been speculating that. That doesn't track with anything. So Gobekli Tepe drives archaeologists and anthropologists nuts this way. Now, recalling what I said about Adam and Eve's genetics showing up 37,000 years ago, the Urantia Book recounts the history of their descendants and their migrations and their efforts to essentially try and stay in Mesopotamia, but how they eventually got overridden by surrounding tribes who outnumbered them. And because Adam and Eve's descendants were peaceful for the most part, they preferred to leave rather than to fight. They mated with some other tribes called the Nodites. That's a different part of the story. That produced a more aggressive genetic strain. But the Adamites were more peaceful. And the Urantia Book describes them being driven out of that area of Mesopotamia where Gobekli Tepe is about 15,000 years ago. So this is the very interesting correlation between the Urantia Book and Gobekli Tepe. Is the Urantia Book actually gives an explanation of why a culture was deteriorating slowly over thousands of years, even though they were advanced compared to the rest of the human beings that seemed to be around back then.
Right.
Well, they were more advanced, and they were slowly deteriorating because they were our genetic upstep, and they were designed to retrogress genetically so that they wouldn't take over.
And there's even pictures that I've seen that are depicted in these these stone carvings that correlate to, I believe that it was the time period in Urantia. I think one of the pictures was of a headless man sitting atop of a flying bird, and that story or that depiction of someone doing that is written about in the Urantia Book.
Yeah, one of the peculiar factoids in the Urantia Book about Adam and Eve is that it says during that time period there was an extraordinarily large bird called a sandor, is the name given to it in the Urantia Book. And it says that the sandors were large enough to carry people, and that they were like domesticated. You know, they're very intelligent and had a good relationship with human beings. And so the Urantia Book also describes, for instance, that Adam and Eve had a violet hue to them, and that their skin sort of glowed because of the energy that they carried, being sort of superhuman. And so when you think about the paintings of Krishna, this blue being flying around on a bird, you know, you can see where the Urantia Book description of all of this fits in to various human mythologies. Now, regarding Gobekli Tepe, what's interesting, as you point out, is that we've got on one of the stones a carving of a headless man on a large bird, and the headless part of it is generally understood to mean that the person is deceased. That is, that they're carving someone who is not alive anymore. And so that, of course, fits with Adam and Eve. And what you didn't mention about the carving was that it also has the man with an erection. And so when we consider that Adam and Eve came as genetic uplifters, it shouldn't be surprising that a depiction of them might, have this sexual aspect emphasized.
Right. It's fascinating to me, and the more I read about it, the more it fascinates me. And so this is one of the topics that I do want to get into a lot more on. But one of the things that interested me when doing research for tonight's show was that I noticed that there was and I've learned this before, but there was a huge spike in the early 20th century of new religions like Scientology, some that I've never heard of, like Aetherius Society, even the OHASP faith, which was done by a dentist named John Newbrough, plus hundreds of others that seem to be familiar or similar in nature to the Urantia Book and how they were written and the otherworldly beings visiting the planet. Is this just sort of coincidence, or is there something going on during this time that maybe, the communication was out there and it was coming in different forms, or people were interpreting it in different forms? But is there anything that you can think of that maybe was going on during this time period that we're just not aware of yet?
It raises a lot of questions. I think one of the things that is going on is that the angels are always trying to figure out ways to work with us. So I think part of it has to do with maybe there were some experiments being run with, how to work with texts, with books, now that we were in the industrial age and the technology was coming along, and the whole, relationship to spirituality with scientific development. I think humanity does go through these sort of growth spurts collectively. I think there's some evidence for that when we look back on history. And I think that stuff is going on. These sort of waves of interest come at certain time periods. I believe humanity grows and the individual grows, and we're collectively marked by certain phases and growth spurts just as we are, individually at times. yeah, I think it was probably something like that. We're definitely ripe for something. There's been a lot of changes going on, and quite quickly. I mean, we can certainly see that, just in terms of the acceleration of human intelligence and industrial development and such.
Right.
And it's really quite something.
Well, Halbert, the subject list from this book, it's really too vast to truly discuss in just one interview. Are there other major revelations in this book that might surprise us?
Other major revelations? You mean like the controversial things, or where the revelation versus affirmation part of it comes in, or what do you mean by that exactly?
Well, is there anything in the book that presents itself that totally goes against, that might surprise us, that goes against what we know? If you could pick something major out of the book that would surprise us.
Well, I think the most challenging thing for people these days is what the Urantia Book says about eugenics and race. And I think a lot of that challenge has to do, one, with the way people misinterpret the Urantia Book, and two, with the fears that they have around these issues that have nothing to do with the Urantia Book specifically. They're just, hot button issues, and people are very reactionary around them. And, if you don't say what people want to hear, they react. So we've got a number of things going on that way. In short, what the Urantia Book is saying about all of this is that there's certain qualities to life that only come about through differentiation and then integration. And so, and part of that differentiation is hierarchical in nature. So, in order, for instance, for altruism to function in human life, there needs to be inequality. That whole aspect of social interaction that we would call altruistic, and the value of it, and the importance of it, is based upon inequalities. And so in the Urantia Book cosmology, this is not something to fear, it's something to celebrate. But in human consciousness, hierarchies and differences, socially are to be feared because people are so darn abusive and bigoted in relationship to these issues. Right? So what we've got in the Urantia Book depiction of things is you remember I said there's different planets of mortals, and it says that on all the different worlds there is differentiation into races. Some get differentiated into 3 races, and some get differentiated into 6 races. So on the ones that get differentiated into 3 races, it's red, yellow, and blue. And on ones that get differentiated into 6 races, it's red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and indigo. And these second 3 are characterized as secondary and sort of an additional thing that brings in some extra variation that isn't necessary but can be beneficial. So the Urantia Book's general description of the plan is that the evolutionary process provides for a mutation process that will differentiate humanity into these different races, 3 or 6, and then these races will have their distinct characteristics, and the idea is for them to make the most of their distinct racial characteristics and then come together and blend and create a new hybridized humanity. And I suppose you might look at the genetics of dogs as a good example this way of how we have these breeds that are inherent in the genetic pattern. But when you want like this awesome combination of mixed traits, the mutt is, this superior type of animal that comes from it all, right? And so, in a certain sense, the Urantia book is describing an aspect of these genetics as it will relate to the long-term development of humanity. These types of conversations are very challenging for a lot of people, especially because of, the historical issues that we've had around racial tensions and eugenic policies and such. And the Urantia book is very specific in saying that improving the gene pool and maintaining the gene pool and improving it is crucial to the development of civilization, and it needs to be intelligently managed, not barbarically managed, intelligently managed,
right.
wisely and lovingly managed, not managed in some bigoted, violent way, but because we have that type of history with race relations and eugenic policies. The Urantia book's encouragement to address ourselves to these issues becomes a target of criticism. And often these criticisms are very unjustified because they're coming from misinterpretations or just, fear-based. And, what goes on. Yeah.
Well, obviously, we're not going to cover this whole topic during the time allotted in the show, but what would you leave our listeners with that may capture their attention other than what we've already talked about?
That would capture their attention beyond what we've talked about. Well, I think one of the most important things is the last third of the book. In terms of capturing people's attention and inspiration, the life and teachings of Jesus is just an extraordinary section of the Urantia book. It explains so much that has gotten confused and distorted in Christianity, and really works to unravel some of the challenges that we have with that religious tradition. And, it goes right to, it's great that you asked that and to bring this up because, I talked from the beginning about how the Urantia book is challenging because it affirms certain things, but it's also revelatory in certain ways. Well, Jesus had the same problem. There are things he said that some people really liked, and they were just, so happy and inspired and zealously motivated to go out and lay down their lives and do everything. But there are other teachings that they really didn't think were so cool, like the equality of men and women spiritually.
Right.
According to the Urantia book, Jesus ordained women to go out and preach the gospel. You don't find that in the New Testament record. So, this is a problem that's been around and is always going to be around with ethical revelations and things that are ahead of their time.
Right.
So, this is where it is a very soul-satisfying, part of the text in a lot of ways for people, because it will affirm things that one, by today's progressive sensibilities, would intuitively expect, to find in the true gospel teachings, or the, true teachings of Jesus expanded beyond the simple gospel message. And so those types of things are very beautiful to read about, very touching and inspiring, and bring a lot of clarity to some of these issues. The atonement doctrine is another thing where the Urantia Book takes pains to explain how the whole vestiges of the Jewish sacrificial system, became the old wine put into the new skins of the gospel teachings, and, led to this whole totally illogical and perverse teaching about justice and mercy, and that our Heavenly Father would need innocent bloodshed. It just doesn't make any sense. No one teaches justice that way. It's based on sacrifice, So there's things like that people find just wonderfully liberating, to read clear statements that challenge some of these old doctrines. I would definitely encourage people to, peruse that. It's a very easy section to read. It's easy to get into, and then there's other things like where it just explains certain little mysteries that, if you're willing to believe the Urantia Book, it really puts issues to rest in a certain way. So, for instance, in Christianity, we've got this theological issue that's been stirring around since the beginning of, why did Jesus on the cross say, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" Right?
Right.
What's up with that? Well, the Urantia Book recounts that as Jesus was expiring on the cross, in order to keep his mind active and, in good spirits as best as he could, he was singing psalms to himself. And I'm sure we're all familiar with how, if we're thinking of a song we like, we might, sing some verses out loud, as, at times if the music is playing along or whatever. And so in the Urantia Book, it recounts that all that happened was Jesus was singing psalms to himself, and some of the words became audible to those kneeled at the foot of the cross. And not really knowing exactly what he was doing, what part of the psalm he was in, perhaps he wasn't carrying the tune particularly well at that point for obvious reasons. It became associated with a commentary of Jesus about, his relationship to God. And so things like that, are just refreshingly sort of put to rest. I really just kind of love that. Little tidbits like that.
Well, you know what, Halbert, this has been a mind-blowing conversation, and we'd love to do a follow-up to this show with you. But how can our listeners learn more about ubthenews.com and your work?
Well, you said it, the letter U, the letter B, THENEWS, ubthenews.com. That is where to go for all of this. It's a free public service. There's nothing really to buy. You can buy these reports on Kindle if you want to make a contribution to the work. Basically, at this point, I'm not writing new reports. The reason being, if people are going to take an interest in the Urantia book based upon the way new discoveries are catching up to it, there's plenty on UB the News to demonstrate why that's, a reasonable thing to consider and be intrigued about, and something to pay attention to. But ultimately, it's there to encourage people to read the Urantia book and really check it out in its fullness and its completeness. As the two of you have been, mentioning all along, there's just all kinds of different issues and things to talk about. So UB the News is a stepping stone. It does have a paper on there called Eugenics, Race, in the Urantia Book. This is the first and only comprehensive review of eugenics and race issues in the Urantia Book, and it's discussed, throughout the book in different ways, and that's why no one ever took the time to do it before. I mean, it's a 100-page document, 100-plus pages. It's, about 50 pages of just direct quotes from the book. So, it's really quite extensive to go through that way. But I think in terms of everything on the website, that's probably the most important thing to read. That really will help people get a handle on a lot of basic ideas and aspects of the history of the Urantia book and some of the theological issues and how they interrelate with planetary issues. So I highly recommend that. One thing I do want to mention, I don't know if anyone's called in with questions or not, but you had brought up your interest in aliens.
Yeah.
And there's one of the very intriguing things in the Urantia book is in its depiction of mortals, it says there's a very small percentage of worlds, like 2 or 3%, I think, of worlds that are created with non-breathers. They're planets that don't have an atmosphere. And the Urantia book says that we would be more than interested to know about one of these planets and what they're doing because they're in close proximity to our solar system. And are you familiar with the Kuiper Belt?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Do you know what the Kuiper Cliff is?
No, I don't know that.
Okay. So for your listeners who don't know, the Kuiper Belt is a belt of asteroids beyond Pluto. And the Kuiper Cliff is where these asteroids in the Kuiper Belt abruptly come to an end. And the question, of course, is why do they abruptly come to an end? And the logical explanation for it is that there is a larger object, like a planet, in rotation around the sun that shepherds the asteroids in so that they don't drift out beyond the Kuiper Cliff. And the model for this that we're familiar with is the rings of Saturn. Saturn has rings because the moons of Saturn shepherd the space dust within certain confines of their orbit, and that's why it looks like rings to us.
Right.
It's just sort of an obvious physics thing when you think about it, right? So, what's interesting about all of this is that our depictions of aliens, the grays, are often, they're gray, and they have big eyes and tiny little noses and mouths, and they communicate telepathically.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you live on a planet that doesn't have an atmosphere, you're probably not singing tunes and whistling Dixie much.
Right.
Think about it. Think about it. That ain't happening.
Right.
Not what's going on, right? And you better start to learn to communicate telepathically because it's the sweet sound of silence otherwise, So it's very intriguing that way that the Urantia book gives this description of non-breathers, suggests that they might be in close proximity to us, and then you've got this Kuiper cliff out there, at the edge of the Kuiper belt. So I think that's sort of some of the best, most intriguing evidence for how we might have been visited by aliens, but not from another solar system.
Mm.
One of the big quandaries about aliens is how could they get here? It takes so long to travel.
Right.
How would they find us? You start to do the math and you just go, you better get some serious warp drive and some incredible telescopes that let you see worlds at a great distance so you know where you're going and why.
Right.
It just really starts to fall apart. But when you look at it as a solar system issue, it becomes very different. And the distances are much more surmountable with technology. And so I think that, this is an interesting intersection between some of the mysteries we deal with. The other thing that relates to that is there's an order of beings called midwayers that are described as midway between humans and angels.
Right.
And so midwayers are said to be residents of the planet. So they're distinct from angels and those orders of celestial beings because those orders of celestial beings are born on celestial spheres and then come to mortal worlds to minister to the mortal beings. But midwayers have their origin on the planet. And they are sort of like the cultural custodians of the planet that way. And it is said that they have the ability to manipulate their energies so that they can become visible. And that, for instance, when it came to getting Peter out of jail, it was the midwayers who got Peter out of jail. There will be Old and New Testament and just generally religious works recording little mysterious, miraculous things happening now and then. And there is an order of beings described in the Urantia book who, would be known for some of that and, could it be made visible at times. And I think that also then relates to some of these issues of aliens and people's perceptions of the alien.
Right.
But, and then what also relates to all of that is that we talked about the default of Adam and Eve, but we really didn't talk about the rebellion too much.
No,
the
right.
the Urantia Book says that the first human beings evolved 1 million years ago, but that this evolution of human life was not sufficient to create civilization. So basically, you had a few of the best individuals were good enough to have some relationship to real spiritual choice and faithfulness. But the genetics were not evolved enough to create a true foundation for civilization. It wasn't, and so the next evolutionary mutation was the development of the races, which occurred 500,000 years ago. And we got the 6 races, all from one mother. And basically what the Urantia Book says is one mother had a bunch of children, that 19, and they were distinguished by 6 colorations, and that this was a dominant genetic, so that then when they mated with, the other people in their tribe, those people took on the coloration of whoever they mated with. And it says that all of these 6 races were superior to, the previous evolutionary development of human beings, and that these races were civilizable. And that is when celestial help came to minister to human beings and help them create civilization. And part of the process of doing that was that 100 human beings were selected to share genetic plasm with what was referred to as the corporeal staff of this celestial administration. And so these 100 human beings who gave some of their life plasm to this staff also received some of this celestial type life plasm from these beings. There was an exchange that way. And so you had 200 beings with some unique and peculiar genetics, and they were not allowed to mate. That was part of the agreement of being part of this celestial administration and government. And it says this persisted for about 200,000 years. And that is when there was a spiritual rebellion, the Lucifer rebellion. And this put an end to the smooth running of the administration that had been in effect up until that time for the previous 200,000 years. And with that rebellion, these staff members and the human beings associated with them, who had all been kept alive by what we refer to as the Tree of Life. According to the Urantia Book, the mythology about the Tree of Life is real. That there was brought to the planet a plant that would keep people alive immortally who were intended to be part of this celestial administration. This is what Adam and Eve also had, and that's why we have all these depictions of the Tree of Life with Adam and Eve. And so it says there was this mixing of material energies with spiritual energies, and that this plant, nourished that in a way that kept physical beings from deteriorating, from aging. So the point is, when the rebellion occurred, this plant was taken away from them. And so we're talking about 200,000 years ago, new genetics got introduced to the planet because these beings that weren't supposed to mate started to mate. That was one of the outworkings of the rebellion and how the rules weren't followed anymore. And so this is where you've got some of these traditions, again, of these kind of superhuman genetics or supermen, between that instance and then also the issues with Adam and Eve. You've got these theologic traditions that, have superhumans mating with the humans. In the Greek mythology and the Roman mythologies, that's very prevalent. But the Urantia book says, these are the things that all of this traces back to. And it's a very peculiar part of our evolutionary history. And you see it right now in the genetics that, like I was just reading a report today that was talking about how Homo sapiens started 200,000 years ago. And that is right when the Urantia book pegs the rebellion. I misspoke before. Things were cool for 300,000 years, from 500,000 years ago to 200,000 years ago. That's when the rebellion occurred. And then we had 150,000 years, roughly, of that time period where there was these genetics from the staff and how they developed their own civilization. And then this race eventually mixed with the Adamites. And so that's where you had these two different sources of superhuman genetics that then mixed with the human beings. And the geneticists are having, this is why the revelation is so important. I mean, if you take this as correct, then you can see, and if you follow the history of like Bruce Lawn's research, we talked about him pegging that microcephalin gene, the extra material that came onto that gene at 37,000 years ago. And it used to be that they were saying Homo sapiens developed around 40,000 years ago. And they were marking 40,000 years ago as the time period where it seemed like that's where human beings really started to take off genetically. But then they keep doing their research, and now it's at 200,000 years ago. And it pretty much kind of jumps through there. I mean, there was some like 120, 150, but, it's real interesting to see how this research actually does track with things in the Urantia book that were, was published before we could even see genes. We were still trying to see chromosomes. Well, hey, do we have any callers?
No, we don't have any callers. We're actually
no callers.
No callers.
Quiet on the phones tonight, huh?
We're out of time, and I do want to thank you so much for coming on. And obviously, as Lucy was saying before, we can't even touch the surface or scratch the surface of the Urantia book in a 2-hour interview. But we'd love to have you come back and talk more about the rebellion, especially because that was of interest to me when I was doing research on this. And just as you were talking, I'm nodding my head as you're speaking because it was just really interesting. So we'd love to have you come on. But thank you so much for coming on and discussing everything that you've done and all the work that you've been able to put forward. I think it's especially appreciative to learn more about this book, and I think it's our listeners really do appreciate you coming on as well.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the invite. I'd be happy to come on again anytime. And as you know, there's people in the Urantia community who I shared news of the radio interview with. Really loved the write-up you did. They were very inspired by it, and I want to thank you guys for doing such a nice job with that. It really, showed effort and sensitivity, and I just really appreciate your questions and the way you approach all this material. It's just really refreshing, to just talk to people who just want a straight scoop and, and aren't really driven by any particular agenda other than let's talk and figure out what's going on. It's just great. I really appreciate it.
There's no bias here. We're looking for truth, and we're looking for answers. And if that's in everything, then everything is put on the table.
Cool. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much.
Albert.
Have a great
Bye-bye.
weekend. Bye-bye.
You too.
I could tell by Lucy, and I'll probably throw her under the bus right now, but I know Lucy was not interested in this topic tonight. And I don't know if it was because it was hard to understand the book or understand the concept. Is that the only reason why?
Pretty much. You know what? Okay, when I looked at the table of contents, I kind of skipped the whole beginning part, and there's certain, because if you look at the table of contents, there's different subjects, okay? The first thing that caught my eye was the subject on shamanism. There's a paper on magic. Those are the things that I went to right away. Not so much the history, not so much the beginning of the book. I kind of jumped to the end of the book. And I know in the research and when I was reading, it does say that, there's no really order. You could, if you go to the Urantia organization site, it says that you can start anywhere and start reading it, which is actually what I did.
Right. And so when you were reading those sections, did you find it interesting or was it difficult to comprehend? He did say that it was written sort of on a PhD level. I mean, yes. I did try to read it myself, and yes, it was a little hard to read. It's not like reading the Bible.
No, it's not.
It's not. And you probably will have to read it over and over and over and over and over again, and probably many more times, to really understand it. But I think that's why I'm so appreciative of people like Halbert and others that are out there that I've been able to listen to online on YouTube and read about, because they've been able to sort of take the context of it all and give presentations that I can understand it more. But with everything else, I always like to read it firsthand and know for myself if that is truly what it is saying, or am I just getting a perspective from someone's point of view, a biased point of view. But I really found this topic in this book, the Urantia book, really interesting because it's, first of all, it's another twist. It's another form of religion that's being put forward. But besides that, because like I mentioned before, there's even just in the early 20th century, there were hundreds of religions that popped up, and one of them was Scientology. And that's sort of one of the well-known ones that are out there in the world right now. But there have been hundreds out there that have popped up in the early 20th century, including the Urantia book. And what interested me more about the Urantia book was the fact that there has been research and studies into the history and the context that are laid out in the book and compared to scientific discoveries and archaeological discoveries. There are other research and even medical research. There's just so many points that have been corroborated and validated after 1955, after this book was published, that could not have been known beforehand. And so it things like that make me think. Obviously, it's not something that, if this book was written in 2010, then I'd say, okay, well, that's a far-fetched. They just copied whatever has been in history, and they just did all the research. Okay, there's nothing really to believe in. But there are things that they're finding that I found interesting that scientists right now are discovering. In this century, in this 21st century, they're only discovering now that we're not even a possible thought in 1955. And so for these group of people, Dr. Sadler's group of people, to write all of this down basically from the person who was channeling these beings and their words, to write all of this down in context and put it cleanly in ascension order for us to understand it, or try to understand it, that it just amazes me that now everything is coming to fruition, sort of, and what else could we discover in the future that can be corroborated in the book. And it's not like an interpretation of text, whereas the Bible, you sort of, like as Halbert was talking about in Revelations, you sort of, was it written in code? Do you have to decipher what they actually meant? And maybe that's what this is, the period that we're going through right now is this, in the Revelations and in the end of times, because of what Revelation says. It's not like that. They talked about, just as Halbert was talking about before, about these Fandor birds that Adam flew on during that time period in history that are now being discovered in archaeological digs. The exact drawings and carvings are put on stone of this large bird and man on top flying and sort of using it as a vehicle, as a plane, flying around. And so is that coincidence, or do you find it as evidence? I'm not stating that this religion is truth. As you all know that I'm going through my little thing about religion, and so what I'm liking about this, not to be a fellowship to or follower of, but what I'm liking about this is that it's intriguing me enough to research it more to find out if that evidence is actually true. And if I'm finding it to be true, then it's making me think, well, is this more truer than the Bible? And is this more truer than the Quran? Is this where we are at, or are there things in here that are said to be true but actually aren't?
Well, see, that's one of the things that kind of intrigued me about the whole thing. I mean, yeah, it's written on the PhD level. It kind of struck me more like as this huge, giant textbook. But then again, too, when you start to read it, it does say that it's not a religion. That it my first thought was like, okay, is this an alternative Bible? Is this a Bible of some sorts as compared to the book that we know as the Bible? And it says no, it's not. Some of the things that are in there, he just kind of touched on it with the Adam and Eve report. I mean, there's certain things about the extra chromosomes and all that. Now, that kind of stuff, it does intrigue me, and I do want to find out about when, where, how, and what. But the main thing, one of the first things he said that really, and I wrote it down, proud of me, was about faith, that we're free to choose whether or not we have faith. And that's basically what struck me about this whole book. I mean, you're free to choose whether or not you believe it. Now, how you come to that belief, for you, it's with the research, finding the evidence that supports it. For others, it may just be, okay, this came from angels, the angels gave it to us. I mean, it's different for everybody. But again, faith is, we're free to choose whether or not we believe in something. I like that. And in terms of this book, there's certain things in there that really do intrigue me. So I haven't gotten into the history. I think it's so huge and there's so many aspects of it. Something like the life of Jesus would be kind of a little bit easier for me to go through and kind of like make my own comparison and come to a conclusion, as opposed to some of the other parts, which really are intense when it talks about humanity, eugenics. I mean, that's huge. And that's really weird, because today I saw a post about the Georgia Guidestones, and that was the first thing that popped in my mind. And now he's talking about the section in the Urantia book that talks about eugenics. That's huge. That's always intrigued me. So this is like a really, really big thing. And I don't know if it's kind of like hard for me to kind of grab onto one part of it. Like, literally, that's why I asked, where do you start? Where do you start? This is huge.
You start, I guess, where you're comfortable with. One of the things that I think, with all new things that pop up of faith or belief, obviously it's not going to catch on right away because the idea of believing in something different than what you are accustomed to, it's sort of gambling with your life. What you believe of how your life is to be led, and even in your afterlife, what is to happen to you. If you were to switch and change, you're sort of gambling with that. You're leaving the comfort and the belief that you've always had that you are going to go just to heaven and be with Jesus and God. And now with Urantia, yes, you are going to be in the heavenly realms and dimensions, but you actually are living another life, and it sort of gives a broad brushstroke to the idea of reincarnation, but not reincarnation, meaning living another life in the afterlife. You actually are living a life. You're working. You're living in a home. It's more of that nature, and it's not of the quote-unquote heavens that you think of. But, we don't have much time left, but I did, just to interest you and, again, to peek, there are so many different things. If you are thinking about Urantia, and if you are thinking about what it's all about, there's a couple of things that really will intrigue you to read up on, and especially as Lucy just talked about the life of Jesus. Now, the Bible obviously talks about a miraculous birth from Mary and the Son of God. In Urantia, it goes into much detail, and it talks about he wasn't actually born of a Virgin Mary. He was just a regular man that was born and spread the word of this faith and was crucified because of that. But there are many different aspects to this that negate a lot of the biblical testimonies, and so obviously a lot of the religions are not in agreement with this and are condemning this. So it would be interesting just to find out what this is all about and why the religions are talking about it, and sort of make up your own decision and make up your own mind. But I found it to be really interesting because it goes into greater detail, and it sort of answered a lot of the questions that I've had about the religion, and it's funny that mainstream religions are and it has been proven that they have hidden a lot of this information, and it's sort of been kept a secret, and people have tried to pull it out from under the rug, but then it's been pushed back under. But the Urantia book, it sort of explains it in full form. So I'm not bashing any religions or anything like that. I'm just saying it's very different type that maybe you guys should just research it a little bit more. But I'm sorry to cut this short, but we went a little bit longer with our guest tonight. So I just want to thank Halbert for coming on the show, and hopefully he will come back on to talk a little bit more in depth. So I'm going to hand this over to Lucy.
Well, two things. One thing, very quickly, I want to mention our Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week, which this week is Heracilio Rain of Ontario, California. Congratulations, Heracilio, and thank you for listening. Second thing, I want to mention next week's show. It's time for another live ITC session. The first two were definitely different. They were very exciting. And what are we going to find during the next one? Well, next Friday night, we're going to attempt to contact Annalise Michel, the young woman who underwent Catholic exorcism rites in Germany in 1975, then died the next year. Was her death from the possession that the Catholic Church was attempting to rid her of, or was it from neglect? This is a case unlike any other, and we hope to contact Annalise to find out what really happened. So be here next Friday night. Thank you, everyone, our global family. Every time you spend with us, it's a gift. Thank you for your support and your love. Thank you, Anthony, for everything you do to make Friday night the best night of the week. So until next week, dear friends, embrace the love and have a paranormal week. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Paranormal Review Radio.